Chapter 7, long-run growth, sources and policies. So, let's see how fast we can do this, because some of my friends want to leave early. All of my friends want to leave early. Okay, so, more capital. Look, it's not more capital, it's better capital. Better technological advancement. It's better quality. It's not more and more and more and more. No, it's not more of the same thing. It's better quality. But there's an assumption in this. The assumption is you actually know how to make use of it. If you don't know how to use a computer, is that going to increase your productivity? Or do you just throw away $2,000? That's why HK becomes so important. If you don't have HK, the ability to adapt, then what good is better quality capital? What was the other reason? What was the other caveat? The condition. Better quality capital. But there is one other thing. The first thing. ROL. What's ROL? Rule of law. That means you get to keep your stuff. Who does the rule of law depend upon? What color? Green. Who's the green actor in this?
Government.
Well, everyone's got an answer when it's the government. That's interesting. I am restricted from saying such things. Thank you for reading my mind. It's government. So if the government, so good quality government, what happens to productivity in theory? Corrupt government? Look where the government is. They're the roads to the firms. They're the tax breaks. They're the subsidies to the producers. They're the thing that builds the schools, keeps the general public happy. They have their actor, the Bank of Canada, control interest rates. They have control over the whole financial system. That's the government. The government's everywhere. If the government is not operating effectively, efficiently, then the people are not having a good time. What's going to happen to growth? Possibilities, probability of growth if the government is uncertain, or if the government policies are uncertain. What happens to the probability of long-term growth? Or at least the probability of uncertainty. Another way to put it is, if the government has questionable enforcement of rule of law, what happens to uncertainty in the world regarding that government? Uncertainty goes up. What happened then? It continues. We'll talk more about that. But essentially, we'll talk more about it. So if there's rule of law, the more productive you are, the greater the opportunity to enjoy leisure. But you have to have rule of law. Helps you increase your productivity, increases your wage rate, and it increases the probability of leisure. Okay, growth determinants. This is the same what we've been talking about, only putting it a little bit differently. What determines growth? Well, we're looking at percent change real GDP per capita. How much real GDP per person? That indicates growth. What's that? That's a function of labor productivity, or how much one person can make per hour, units per hour. If that improves, What happens to standard of living? It goes up. All things being equal. What's the logic behind this? Well, what does that little gift actually break down to? Well, that's expenditure. And what's equal to expenditure? Income. You get your income in the factor market. What are all the various incomes? Profit, land rent, small l, real interest rates, and wages, real wages. So the price of that output, in theory, equals the price of all the inputs. Or the shovel equals the gift. And so, if we have an increase in any one of these, what does it imply? In general, we've got better HK, and we've got better quality capital. How do we get bigger this? We get better this. Better productivity comes from better quality capital and human capital. How do you become more productive? Better quality capital, human capital. End of story. Plus, you get the organization and management of labor, capital, and resources, otherwise known as better technology. And then what happens to productivity? It increases. So an increase in output necessarily implies an increase in investment. And that's why financial markets are so important. Because without financial markets, which are dependent upon the quality of government, we would not be able to take the excess rents, otherwise known as savings, and funnel them into increased capacity production. And I say this because, as we noted, the government is everywhere. And if you don't have it, and if your government is less than efficient, then, and especially in the financial markets, what ends up happening? What's the financial markets for? It's for reducing risk. Well, if the government is acting quote unquote stupid, then all of your expected values change. And when expected values change, when the future expected values change, what happens to risk? If your future expected returns are increased in variance, what happens to risk right now? It increases. It's like saying, I know for certain that if I invest $2 today, in a year, I'll get $3. As opposed to, well, it could be I'll get $10 or I'll lose $10. If the variability of expected future income increases, that means risk right now has increased because you don't know what's going to happen. And that's what happens when you've got a government that you're uncertain about. Another thing, financial markets ensure liquidity. What that means is if you have an asset and you want to sell it, you can always find a buyer. Or there's always cash available in the system. Another way to look at it. If the government is not doing its job, liquidity goes down. You can't always sell your Microsoft stock. or the price of oil goes negative, like happened last year. And last, financial markets are made to ensure that there's information available for everyone. Everyone has information to make buying and selling decisions in the market. Well, if the government isn't operating properly, then that means some people are going to have information, whereas others will not. That increases uncertainty. That means the market is not efficient. That causes prices to that increases risk in the system. That increases the probability that that increases the chance that growth is not going to be as good as it could have been. So, questions? Right now, this is happening, by the way. Right now, this is happening. Over the past 6 months, equity markets and debt markets have been going down, down, down. Why? Increased uncertainty about what is going to happen. And what you're also seeing is the United States dollar has appreciated versus almost all of the other currencies. Why? Because the United States dollar is considered to be safe. Remember, if uncertainty is going up, if uncertainty is going up, what happens to prices of things that are safe? They go up. What happens to prices of things that are risky? Depending, they usually go down. So people go to safety when uncertainty is high, when risk is high. They're going to the United States dollar, despite the fact that the United States is arguably the cause of all of the uncertainty. Incidentally, you might want to take a look at cryptocurrency versus USD. There's an interesting relationship there, by the way. I will not say anything more on that. Okay, any questions about where the financial system comes into play? Where does growth come from? Growth does not come from hope. It comes from having quality capital, human capital, technological advancement. In other words, it comes from people being creative and given a chance to be creative, I would argue. Okay, economic growth. Production theory suggests that output per worker increases as human capital increases. True or false? You're more productive the better capital you have. True. So then, that would be an up arrow. Is there a plus sign or a minus sign over HK here? Is there a plus sign or a minus sign over HK? It's a plus. This is a bit different curve. No intercepts, no math here. Yay, we're sick of math, Charles. The reason I'm not doing math is because this is an exponential function, and I don't quite, and let's just say I didn't take the time to look up the math, and it would have probably made you all go crazy. HK increases output per hour worked. Capital per hour worked, increase, 0. So how do you think of this? If delta HK is knowledge and experience performing manual labor, like digging a hole, and if capital is 1 shovel and Y is number of holes dug, then the actor who learns digging skills is able to dig more holes per hour of effort, which increases income per hour. So skills and training increases your wage. That's what that says. Or your income. But ultimately, increases in HK in theory increases your wage. And that leads to an increase in income. Number 2, dynamic economic growth. All else equal, access to online learning increases labor productivity and therefore shifts the per person production function upwards. True or false? Access to online learning increases productivity, therefore it shifts the curve upwards. True or false? True. Where is that on the circular flow diagram? Up here, down here, or over here? Up here, down here, or over here? Where is this answer? Up here, right. What's the icon? Stick man. What's the icon here? Same one, stick man. So increase in, I'm taking online learning as higher quality capital. So actually this is on the work, at work capital. So it's not up here, it's actually down here. The answer will be straightforward on the test. So you've got higher quality capital. It's like this. I used to have to go to the library to get information. Now we have online learning. So the quality of capital, access to that type of capital has altered, as opposed to the actual knowledge. And let's see, remember, real GDP per hour worked. Did I put that up here? Oops, real GDP, sorry about that, my friends. Real GDP per hour worked is on the y-axis. And that is Y by L. Capital per hour worked, K by L. You can also think it, I won't say it. Anything else? Actors are able to adapt to online learning, new technology at each previous amount of hours worked. More can be produced. How do you know this? Well, given the type of capital you had before, access to online learning means that you can produce more given the new access to online learning. That's how you read it. Any questions about this? Observations about productivity effect. Some things to keep in mind. Over time, capital per labor, the amount of capital per worker hour, it increases. This means you have an increase in technology, which leads to an increase in wage, which leads to an increase in standard of living, which probably increases your leisure. But keep in mind, there's one thing that you never see in all of these diagrams. And that is, it all depends on the individual actor. Right back to the beginning of the class. In my opinion, it can be argued, you're responsible for doing investment in yourself. If you want to do the best you can, if you want to increase your productivity over time, it's up to you. And not enough is talked about that, in my opinion. It's very little amount in the book. But you go to graduate school, and that's all they talk about. All they talk about is HK. So, then the question is, why is it that some countries are just not growing? They should be. They should be. There should be countries in the world catching up. India, Vietnam. A lot of developing countries are not catching up. They are getting more and more capital per person. They've come from very low levels of capital, and now there's new technologies, online learning, financial technology, where you can pay. There's people in the desert in Africa that can buy stuff with their cell phone because there's online banking now in the middle of the desert in Africa. It's amazing what's happened in sub-Saharan Africa. And yet, people's standard of living is not going up. Why? And the answer begins with the color green. How many countries in the world are relatively free?
195.
That's how many countries in the world, but how many of them are actually enjoy freedom? Yeah, different question. Okay, all the asterisks. Why are some countries not achieving as much as they could? First, health. Here, the number one cause of revolution, the number one cause of true political uncertainty is the health of your people. This isn't in the book, but this comes from a lot of research I've done. If you've got people that are dropping dead and are sick all the time, they're not going to be happy with your government. And it's going to cause long-term problems. Number two, education. If you're not educating your people, if you want to keep them stupid and following you, eventually they're going to overthrow you, is one way to look at it. North Korea comes to mind. The people there are not healthy. They're not well educated. How long is it before North Korea falls? I don't know. And that's all politics. I'm just saying there is an example for you. The people in North Korea are essentially starving, and they're uneducated. What are their growth prospects without help? Savings. If you don't have savings or a good financial system, you're not going to be able to grow. End of story. You look at Japan. Japan has essentially been in recession for 30 or 40 years. Historically, and this started in the 80s, the Japanese are historically high savers. They put off consumption today so that they can save for their children. What happens to investment over time and the cost of investment? What did we learn today? The Japanese have been having a terrible time because of their savings. Another reason, if your labor markets are not efficient, you're not going to do well. In how many countries where there's a dictatorship, is there someone that you can go to say, my boss is a bad guy? Yeah, it doesn't happen. If you don't have rule of law, you're not going to grow. If you don't have good investment opportunities through financial market, savings, labor market, you're not going to grow. And what happens if your neighbor decides they're going to come and kill you? All these reasons reduce the chance to grow. And so, what Paul Romer said in 1990, see you guys. The key is in all of this. Yeah, there's keys everywhere. HK and tech. HK and tech, HK and tech, there's two keys. What Romer says, and I got to study him, he's one of the ones, HK theory. What you need to do is, what you like to do is have incentives, because remember, actors respond to incentives. That's why you're here. You're here because you want to learn something. You want to learn something. You wouldn't be here if you just want a grade. You're here because you want to learn something. That's the incentive. What Romer says is that as far as HK is concerned, you have to give people an incentive to actually want to better themselves. Romer says you have to give people an incentive to want to better themselves. And the first place it starts, rule of law. Rule of law. Because if you don't get to keep what's yours, and you're not given the opportunity for increasing your potential through free education until you're 16 or 17, there's no incentive to better yourself. There's no incentive to better yourself if the government is not going to watch your back and you can't keep what's yours. There's no incentive to better yourself. Because what ends up happening if you're smart? What ends up happening when you're the smart one in the business? Who does all the work? Who gets all the benefit? Who gets fired when they start to complain that they're not getting paid enough because I do all the work? I've seen this happen. The people that are creative, that know how to survive, the people that know how to survive, that's different. But people that are creative, if you're really, really creative, you have to be really, really careful. Because there's always someone that's going to say, hey, I got my eye on you, because you know what you're doing way better than the rest of them. So I'll just give you a little bit of extra work, a little pat on the back, but no extra money. How does that feel when after 5 years, your hair is going gray, you're still 20, and you're not getting paid what you're worth? You're not getting paid what you're worth, and not only that, he got a promotion because he did something that you helped him do. I've seen this. You've all seen this. I hope you never see it. When you're creative, generally, your effort gets. Theory is, when you're creative, wage goes up. My experience, what happens is, you're creative, everyone else's wage goes up, and yours doesn't go up as much as it should. Because creativity, if I give you an idea, how much did it cost you? Nothing. How much does it cost you to use it? Nothing. How much profit do I make from you making profit off of my idea? I get nothing. Creativity is not exclusive. Creativity is not exclusive. You can't keep it for yourself. To profit from creativity means other people have to make use of it. So Romer says you have to give incentives to people who are creative so that they get to keep a little bit for themselves. Which is probably why you come to this class, because you get to keep a little bit of it for yourself. Any questions?
Not to get too political, but isn't that one of the reasons why the USSR did never, like, its economy always went down? Because there was no incentive to innovate.
The only reason the Americans are doing as well as they have is that they have had that. But remember, we're always in a growth model. See you next week. Email me if you've got any problems. Good luck on the test. Have a nice afternoon. Good question. Just a minute. Wow, I keep going overtime.